What is a completely true fact that doesn't sound real at all? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. Pretty much everything about the platypus. Ahem. They lay eggs and produce milk, but no nipples. The milk just kind of sweats out of the mother's torso, pooling on her belly for the young to lick off. After they, hatch. And they're venomous. Spikes on their hind legs. Oh yeah, they're also darn near telepathic. They can directly sense the electrochemical activity of at least the motor movements within the bodies of other animals when underwater. That's actually what the duckbill is for. Yeah, there's no way all that crap is true, except somehow it is. Story 2. New York City's water supply comes from almost 100 miles upstate via an aqueduct that operates entirely by gravity. It slopes down from there all the way into the city. It comes in with enough pressure that if you're on the 6th floor or lower of your building, you'll have running water and a working shower, even if there's a blackout throughout the entire region. Story 3. Jupiter's moon Europa, which is smaller than our moon and only about 14 the diameter of Earth, has 2 to 3x more liquid water than Earth. Answer: Europa Clipper is currently on its way there. It launched in October 2024 and isn't going to reach Jupiter, Europa until April 2030. Europa Clipper is the first mission designed to conduct a detailed study of Jupiter's moon Europa. There is scientific evidence that the ingredients for life may exist on Europa right now. The spacecraft will travel 1.8 billion miles, 2.9 billion kilometers, to reach Jupiter in April 2030. It will orbit Jupiter and conduct 49 close flybys of Europa. Source: NASA. Story 4. The sea cucumber can expel its internal organs as a defense mechanism. When threatened, sea cucumbers can release their internal organs, including their digestive system, and then regrow them. Story 5. Russia temporarily ran out of vodka, including reserves, in 22 hours due to immense street celebrations following Nazi Germany's surrender on May 9, 1945. Story 6. There's a medical condition called autobrewery syndrome, where the body creates ethanol, causing intoxication symptoms, without adult beverage consumption. Story 7. About 7% of all people who ever lived are alive today. 117 billion births, 8 billion alive now. Story 8. The closest planet to Neptune is Mercury. Mercury is, on average, the closest planet to every other planet in the solar system. Story 9. There was a molasses flood that eliminated 21 people in 1919. Happened in Massachusetts, where large vats exploded, flooding the street and eliminate people. Story 10. Clouds. Clouds are just heavy, saturated with humidity, pockets of air that fudge float above our heads. Story 11. Although rock hyraxes look like rodents, DNA analysis has shown that their closest relatives are elephants and manatees. Story 12. The best glide angle of any particular airplane doesn't change with weight. The speed to maintain that best angle does change. Glider pilots use this property to do cross-country flights. Story 13. Stalin called Henry Ford one of the greatest industrialists of the world because Ford built a Model A factory in the USSR, trained workers from the USSR in the US, and sent workers from the US to the USSR to train more people. Henry Ford thought the way that you defeated communism was through capitalism. Henry Ford is probably the only person that Stalin and Hitler liked. Story 14. Inside the cocoon, the caterpillar doesn't hibernate and sprout wings, but liquefies into a cellular soup and reconstitutes into an wholly new organism. Story 15. It blows my mind that Oxford University predates the Aztec Empire. Also, there are still pirates, but they use little speedboats and still somehow manage to take over giant jerk container ships. Also, people really truly think the Earth is flat. Story 16. Since matter is energy, as per EMC, the average person has a rest mass energy of about 100,000 times more than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Story 17. Here's a fun fact. The universe expanded so rapidly from the Big Bang that matter space started to expand at near the speed of light in all directions. It's still expanding at near light speed. Because of that, there's entire galaxies that we can never see, because light from those galaxies can never reach us, since it's moving away from us almost as fast as it takes light to travel to us, and we are traveling in the opposite direction at similar speeds, therefore impossible for light to ever reach us. For a simpler, yet unfair explanation, imagine firing 2 bullets away from each other in opposite directions. Answer: matter started to expand at near the speed of light in all directions. You meant space, right? Not matter. It's still expanding at near light speed. Measured between which 2 points? The distance between my head and my computer screen isn't growing near light speed. The distance between the Earth and some galaxy beyond the cosmic event horizon, well, it's growing faster than the speed of light. That's why light from that galaxy can never reach us. And they say nothing can travel faster than light. Story 18. Quetzalcoatlus was real. This thing looks super fake. Giant head on the end of a long neck. How did it not tip over? Also, it could fly and was the size of a small airplane. Story 19. Your fingernails grow at roughly the same rate as tectonic plates move around. There are some plates like the Indian plate that are way quicker though. Story 20. Your body is mostly non-human. For every human cell in your body, there are at least as many microbial cells. Bacteria, fungi, viruses. You're not just you're an ecosystem. Answer. A. That statement is a little suspect based on how you define the word mostly. The non-human cells outnumber your human cells, sure, but they're far, far smaller. If we had, for example, a beach that was buried under 10,000 dead whales, you wouldn't say the beach is mostly covered in sand because the sand particles outnumber the whales. You would say that the beach is mostly covered in dead whales. Story 21. Octopuses are so intelligent that many scientists argue they should be considered non-human persons. Some countries are even starting to give them legal protections similar to mammals. Imagine eating calamari being treated like eating dolphin. Story 22. You are sent back in time to the year 100,000 BC. Early Homo sapiens are beginning to migrate out of Africa, and large parts of Europe are under about a kilometer of snow and ice. There are about 90,000 years left before the end of the Ice Age. You are immortal. You immediately begin saving 10,000 every single day without ever spending any of it. You keep contributing to your stash, never missing a day. Every day, 10,000 more. Gradually, the years pass. In your long lifetime, you witness human migration out of Africa, Neanderthals disappear, Stone Age, hunter-gatherers, first tools, agriculture, farming revolution, Bronze Age, early cities, writing, wheels, ancient Egypt civilization, Mesopotamia, Sumer Babylon, ancient Greece democracy, Iron Age, weapons empires expand, Roman Empire, rise of Christianity, Islamic Golden Age, Viking Age, Mayan civilization, Mongol Empire, European Renaissance, Age of Exploration, Scientific Revolution, Industrial Revolution, American Revolution, French Revolution, American Civil War, World War I, World War II, Moon landing, Internet Age, Climate Crisis. Finally, 2025 comes around and you're back to your normal life. You check how much money you have put away and see if you are the richest person alive. Even though you have been saving since before the dawn of multiple civilizations, since before the population of Europe, since before the Stone Age, since the Ice Age, you still won't have the same net worth as Elon Fudge Musk. You have $372 billion. Musk currently has a net worth of $422 billion. Absolutely fudge billionaires. Story 23. John Tyler's grandson, Harrison Ruffin, Tyler passed away this year, 2025. John Tyler was the 10th president of the USA from 1841-1845. Story 24. The mantis shrimp strikes so fast that it creates a cavitation bubble. When this bubble collapses, the water surrounding it is momentarily hotter than the surface of the sun. Story 25. GPS cannot accurately determine your position on Earth if it doesn't use both special and general relativity, derived by Einstein, to account for the way time evolves for objects in relative motion and at different gravity potentials. The creepy extended conclusion from these real effects is that time is not a linear sequence, but rather more like a volume where events are located. It's like looking around a room at the objects it contains, except the objects are events. Those things are already there, in that room, already in place. So on your phone, when you bring up your Maps app, you might very well be proving that free will is nothing but pure illusion. Answer. That's a pretty fanciful interpretation of what special relativity is. Nobody's constrained in a future that someone else has experienced or some nonsense. It's the opposite. If you travel faster, you will experience time slower, locally. It's not much when all we're talking about is the difference between Earth's surface and orbit, but yes, it is necessary to consider to avoid clocks drifting apart. Story 26. That all Major League Baseballs are rubbed with mud before being used, and the mud comes from one specific place in New Jersey. Story 27. 1 lb uranium has the same amount of energy as 2,500,000 lbs coal. 2,500,000 lbs of coal is roughly 2 train cars of coal. Story 28. On the smallest scale, Particles exist in a superposition probability cloud that can affect itself as if two things are happening at once, because they are. Story 29. The first person to hypothesize human-caused greenhouse warming from fossil fuel emissions was Guy Callender in 1938. Auto industry scientists at GM and Ford recognized CO2 from cars as a climate change driver in the 1960s. Story 30. Your nose is always in your field of vision, but as it serves as nothing but an impediment to visual information gathering, our brains erase it. It only exists if you pay specific attention to it, like you're doing right now. Story 31. In baseball, the umpires' bodies count as fair territory, so any ball that hits them is still in play. Similarly, there's a couple stadiums where the catwalks in the dome are fair territory, and there used to be a stadium with a hill and flagpole in center field. Story 32. UAE. Up until a few months ago, the 10th president of the United States, John Tyler, had a living grandson. John Tyler was born in 1790 and took office in 1841 when he assumed the presidency upon William Henry Harrison's passing. He had 8 children with his first wife and 7 with his second, the youngest being born in 1860 when he was 70, making him the U.S. president who fathered the most children. His son Lyon had a child when he was 75 years old in 1928. Tyler's grandson, Harrison Ruffin Tyler, was living in Virginia and passed away on May 25, 2025. The period from the president's birth to his grandson's passing spanned 235 years. Story 33. There's a protein in your brain that can mutate completely spontaneously for no reason, infecting other proteins, causing you to slowly lose the ability to sleep until passing. There's no cure or treatment. Sporadic, fatal insomnia. Story 34. Every single human is technically part stardust. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you breathe, all forged in the core of ancient stars that exploded billions of years ago. Without those supernovae, you'd just be a cloud of hydrogen atoms floating around. So the wild part? Right now, the atoms in your body are older than the Earth itself. Story 35. An anti-vaxxer with a dead worm in his brain is currently United States Secretary of Health and Human Services. Story 36. Back in the day, pubic hair wigs were a thing. In 15th century Europe, many women lost their pubic hair to gonorrhea or purposely shaved to combat lice. Because a bald pubic region signaled disease bugs, women would wear a merkin. Story 37. A celebrity personality from a reality TV show was elected President of the United States of America twice. Story 38. Until 6 hours ago, it was illegal to walk in any forest within 9-hour drive of me in any direction. It was even illegal to walk on barren rock because it legally counts as the woods. The punishment was a $25,000 fine. Nothing at all changed regarding the conditions. It is now no longer illegal to walk in the forest. Story 39. You weigh roughly 5 more standing on the Earth's poles than at its equator. If you weigh 200 lbs and want to lose a pound quickly, Story 40. Lying in bed, a person is moving at several incredible speeds. Earth's rotation at 45 degrees latitude, 180 km, 700 km, orbiting the sun, 107,000 km, 67,000 moving through the galaxy, 792,000 km, 492,000 punch. Story 41. All people are basically the same physical age due to our physical cells continually replacing themselves and eliminating old cells. It's just the degradation of the DNA reproduction process and the plasticity of our brains that change shape with every interaction that give us age and our lifelong memories. Our Story 42. In hockey, there is a fact that messes with people. It is possible to score a goal before the opening face-off. Explanation. If a game is postponed for certain reasons, often medical crises involving players, and rescheduled, the game itself starts all over again at full length. However, any goals scored prior to the original game being postponed will still count, officially recorded as being scored at 0 seconds into the game. Story 43. Every solid object you have ever seen is actually 99 empty space. When you touch an object, you never actually contact it either. Answer. This is like the theory that when something falls, it never actually ever hits the ground. It falls half the distance, then half the remaining, and so on, leaving infinitely less distance, but never actually hits the ground. It's a stupid math trick, and there are many. In reality, it does fall half the distance, and then it falls the other half. Story 44. An AVM is a mass of tangled blood vessels. They tend to be hereditary, but also can be random. If it bursts in the wrong place, you will bleed to passing. You could be walking to school, at work, reading a book, and have one burst and be dead in minutes. My mom had one in her brain. Massive stroke caused by the bleeding at 54. It's easily fixed with a shunt or cauterization, but how would you ever know? My nose used to bleed all the time, non-stop. I finally went to an ENT specialist after I had money, and he found the massive blood vessels in my nose that my mom had in her brain. It's luck of the draw. Story 45. Oh, I know this one. I just got to use it the other day. Ahem. The day on Venus is actually longer than the year. Story 46. It's still mind-blowing for me the fact that our brain is us, and the entire body is like an armor for protection and sustain. When you see images of the brain and the nervous system, well, that's you. The rest of it, it's just ways to sustain and feed the brain with the elements he needs, mostly proteins and water. Another thing that I still can't capacitate myself to understand is why the hell we, living beings, have the need for sleep, and we also dream. I see the dreaming as a way for the brain to keep functioning even in sleep mode, so it knows we are not dying and just resting. But why do we need sleep? Why does our body need to rest by closing the eyes? Story 47. Tom Brady never took one snap in the regular season where his team was mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. Story 48. Horseshoe crabs are not crabs. They are even more closely related to spiders than they are to lobsters. How I loathe them. Story 49. A Laserdisc, 70s Zero optical video format, is incapable of video copy protection to where macrovision could not be used on it. So you could hook up any VCR to a Laserdisc player and get a good video signal out of it. Story 50. The current president of the United States is a pedophile, racist, bigot, narcissist, and a dementia victim. Story 51. While Indonesia is the single most volcanically active country in the world, 2 is actually the United States, I would presume because of Hawaii. Story 52. There are more atoms of hydrogen in a single molecule of water than there are stars in the solar system. Story 53. Humans have quite possibly been in Australia for 60,000 years. 60,000 years. We managed to get from Africa to Australia faster than we crossed the Mediterranean, since humans have only been in Europe 45,000 years. Even the short date for arrival in Australia still puts it at being inhabited at the same time Europe was. It's just mind-blowing. Story 54. After the conclusion of WW2, Ford Motor Company sued the U.S. government for damage done to their German production plants due to Allied bombing and won. Story 55. Blue jays don't have any blue pigment. Their feathers pigment, melanin, is brown. If you crush the feather of a cardinal into a powder, it will be red. If you do the same with a blue jay feather, the powder will be grayish, brown, and black. Blue jays and other blue birds use a trick called light scattering. Story 56. We are technically still in an ice age as far as the history of Earth is concerned. It's going to get a lot warmer with or without us. Story 57. The Pacific Ocean is so large that there are parts of it where, if you could dig a hole straight down through the center of the Earth and pop up on the exact opposite side of the planet, you'd still be in the Pacific Ocean. Story 58. Violent crime in the U.S. is roughly half of what it was in the 90s. Surprise, for some reason we have the military going around to cities now over crime, but it's really not that bad if you bother to check the stats. Oh, and the fact that a sitting U.S. president has authorized the domestic use of the military to essentially act as beat cops. Or that we have masked federal agents grabbing people off the streets with zero due process of any kind. Story 59. Best Friends Animal Society is a cult formerly known as the Process Church of the Final Judgment. Their MO was causing harm and passing. Now that they've turned into an animal shelter for public presentation, they continue that by being the single most powerful entity in the pit bull lobby. They pay millions every year to go to get breed bans overturned, protest against the euthanasia of dogs who have eliminate people, try to block any new breed-specific legislation, and provide the funding for no eliminate shelters, which they will yank if the shelters put down dangerous fighting bust and aggressive dogs like they should. They pay for pro-pit propaganda to air all over public media. They're doing a great job perpetuating maulings and deaths, shelter overcrowding, and allowing the proliferation of dogfighting rings. Story 60. The president was convicted of 34 felonies prior to being elected, yet a bunch of idiots elected him anyway. Story 61. We live on a planet which in relation to our galaxy is as big, if not even smaller than an atom. To visualize their tiny size, you'd need to line up roughly 10 million atoms side by side to span just 1 millimeter. So our solar system is literally not there, LOL. Story 62. You can manipulate matter FTL, but not data. For example, If you quantum entangle two particles, which you can actually do, manipulating one will manipulate the other FTL. But in order to interpret the data from one, you need to know about the other, and that data is sent by traditional means. Edit, and yes, by you I mean you. Quantum computers are real and accessible. Look up Hadamard gates and NOT gates on Wikipedia. See, NOT gates are kinda like pointers, but instead of being a theoretical abstract, actually entangle two particles so that manipulating one variable tied to one partial manipulates the other particle tied to the other. Story 63. A man once ate an airplane, not some guy swallowing a toy plastic airplane, but ATE, a whole 680 kilograms Cessna 150 small airplane. Michel Lotito spent 2 years cutting up pieces of the plane and eating it little by little, averaging nearly 1 kilo of plane per day till he finished it. Story 64. The compound bow, like the bow and arrows that pretty much all hunters use, that was invented more than 20 years after the atom bombs dropped. Story 65. Coastlines of countries have infinite length, kinda. Coastlines exhibit fractal-like behavior, infinite detail and complexity as you zoom in, meaning in an ideal mathematical world, their length is infinite. The only thing stopping it from being truly infinite are physical limitations, where if you keep zooming in, the detail eventually smooths out, meaning it's not an actual fractal. That makes it nearly impossible to measure a county's coastlines accurately. The smaller the segments of length you use to measure the coastline, the bigger the length. For example, if we measure the coastline of Great Britain with 100-kilometer length segments, the length is approximately 2,400 kilometers. If we measured it in 100-meter segments, the length is approximately 1,700 kilometers. Story 66. There are more hydrogen atoms in a single molecule of water than there are stars in the entire solar system. Story 67. If you could amass every Major League Baseball player who ever lived since the game began, they wouldn't even fill the stands of the smallest modern-day, regularly used MLB stadium. Story 68. Nintendo's Donkey Kong video game from the 80s, where DK and Mario were created, was originally going to be a Popeye video game. Walt Disney's Oswald the Lucky Rabbit was originally property of Universal. Story 69. There's not really a purple color wavelength of light, and your brain just kind of makes it up. Purple is a lie. Story 70. We live during the same time as the largest ever known creature on Earth, the blue whale, with some up to about 200,000 kilono or 440,000 pounds in mass. Not even the largest dinosaurs come close. If the sun were shrank to a 1.4 million or grain of sand, Proxima Centauri would still be 42 kilometers or 26 miles away, a marathon between grains of sand. If you replace Proxima Centauri with the largest known black hole, Phoenix A, it would still look larger than the sun from the Earth. You could use the sun as a gravitational lens if you put a telescope 542 astronomical units away and look just past the sun with it while blocking its light. However, this is about 3.5x further than Voyager 1, so it would be nearly a 2-century journey to get there with current technology. However, if you did this, you could resolve pictures of exoplanets well enough to see their surface in detail. The most created object is the transistor, with hundreds of quintillions made each year, and that number's only ever growing exponentially. Story 71. That in 1984, the CIA tried to, in a sense, trick a psychic by giving them a sealed envelope they weren't allowed to open until after, with a piece of card giving the location of the planet Mars in the year 1 million BC, with a set of coordinates said during the remote viewing interview. This was done under Project Stargate, and the CIA document is called Mars Exploration, May 26, 1984. A summary of what is detailed is what the psychic described as a dying planet, alongside a dying civilization sheltering inside of these pyramid-like storm shelters. The psychic managed to speak to one of these ancient people and gathered the understanding that they were waiting on the return of a group of theirs that left as a shiny metal vessel, which was on a journey to find a new home. It's a cool 9-page read. You can download it directly from the CIA archives online. Story 72. Octopuses have 3 hearts, their blood is blue, and when they are stressed, they become transparent. If I were the same, I would be invisible 34 of the day. Story 73. Before he became the beloved child star Blippi, Stephen John tried and failed to go viral by participating in the Harlem Shake trend. His unique twist on the Harlem Shake was to defecate on a naked man. Story 74. Thanks to John Boyes, I know that a U.S. football game can end in a final score of 0-1, 1-1, 2-1, 3-1, 4-1, 5-1, or 17-1, but can end in a final score of 6-1, and any score 8 and higher to 1. This has never happened and almost certainly never will. Story 75. The Great Pyramids of Egypt were already ancient to Cleopatra. They were in fact 2,500 years old already when she was ruler. She ruled just 2,000 years ago. So we're closer to her in history than she was to the Great Pyramids. You could say Cleopatra lived closer in time to the first moon landing than the completion of the Great Pyramids. Story 76. At midnight, when the moon is full, zillions of little silver fish swim up onto the beaches, sacrificing themselves so people can eat. Grunion. Illegal to catch with anything except your hands. Story 77. It is illegal to take your lion to the movie theater in Maryland. It's one of our really old, definitely odd laws that never got rewritten. Story 78. There are more ways to shuffle a deck of 52 cards than there are atoms on Earth. So every time you randomly shuffle a deck of cards, you are most likely the first and last person to ever achieve that combination. Story 79. If you shuffle a deck of cards, you have most likely gotten that order of cards for the first time ever in humanity. Story 80. 66 million years ago, dinosaurs were still roaming our planet. If there is a neighboring planet 66 million light years away with life on it that has a telescope strong enough to reach Earth and see what's going on our planet, they would currently be watching dinosaurs roaming our planet, since they are technically watching our planet 66 million years ago due to how light travels. Story 81. The business plot was a plan by bankers to overthrow President FDR by force because he was a socialist. No one was convicted. Story 82. Despite any climate change argument, the carbon dioxide laser remains the most popular industrial laser in the world. It exploits CO2's inherent ability to absorb energy and emit it at far infrared wavelengths, den 600 nanometers to be exact, heat. Story 83. We harbor so much bacteria that there are more bacterial cells, 40 trillion, in our bodies than human cells, 30 trillion. And when you expand it to all microscopic creatures we harbor, the number increases to about 100 trillion cells, bacteria, viruses, fungi, mites, etc., that are not human. Story 84. Orange peels are often pumped with dye to make them more orange, and it's approved by the FDA. I believe it will be phased out in 2026. Story 85. The camel's hump stores fat, but when it burns the fat, it makes more water than if the hump just stored water. Story 86. There is a galaxy in the night sky, Andromeda, that is 6 times bigger than the moon, but we can't see it because it is a little too dim. Story 87. The color pink is named after the flower in the Dianthus genus. The flower got its name from the fringed edges of the flower petals. Story 88. There are as many even numbers as there are even and odd numbers, since every number has a corresponding even number when multiplied by 2. Story 89. Time technically moves slower at your feet than your head. For example, if you're 2 meters tall and standing at sea level on the equator, time at your feet moves 2 times slower than at your head. Negligible, but measurable with atomic clocks. Story 90. Depending on its current orbit, Mercury is the closest planet to every other planet in the solar system. Pluto, too. Story 91. One man, Claire Patterson, worked on the Manhattan Project, computed the age of the Earth, and discovered fuel exhaust fumes had spread, tetraethyl, lead contamination everywhere on Earth. Story 92. Octopus have 9 brains, 1 central brain and a mini brain in each of its 8 arms. They also have 3 hearts. Story 93. Cleopatra, 30 BCE, was closer to the making of the ChatGPT than the making of the Great Pyramids of Giza, 2560 BCE. Similarly, Treks live closer to us, 65-70 million yay, than to Brontosaurus, Brachiosaurus, or Stegosaurus, 145 million yay. Story 94. Any axiomatic mathematical system, like the one we typically use, can prove lots of things are true, but there will always be things that are true that the mathematical system simply cannot prove. Story 95. You are related to every single animal, plant, bacteria, etc. ever lived. Not in just a humans are related to trees kind of way, but you as an individual are related to every other Redditor, Abraham Lincoln, Buddha, Tutankhamun, the first human ever set foot out of Africa. You're related to the plant outside your house, to the first T-Rex that died from the asteroid, and so on. There's a family tree that connects us all as individuals. Story 96. You can get a drill bit that drills a square hole. It is based on the Rouleau triangle. Electrons can travel faster than light, in water that is. If you want to be accurate, nothing with a rest mass greater than 0 can accelerate to equal or exceed the universal constant c in a vacuum. Electrons and other charged particles can travel faster than photons, i.e., light, in water. Story 97. In 1725, Emperor Peter the Great sent an expeditionary force from Russian-controlled Alaska to American with the intent of exploring possible areas of colonization. The Russians made it as far as California before turning back. Story 98. Imagine it's 100,000 BC, you're immortal, and from then until today, for 125 years, you've been receiving 10,000 every single day. You would still have less wealth than Elon Musk. Story 99. One of our nostrils is constantly blocked and barely lets air through. However, it is very hard to notice because of the pressure balance. It is only really noticeable when you're sick and one of your nostrils feels blocked no matter how hard you blow your nose. Another fun fact is that the nostrils switch every couple hours. And now that you know this, you will suffer with me through constantly feeling like one of your nostrils is blocked. Also, if you're lucky enough, you can actually feel the switch happen. Story 100. Bomb-sniffing equipment used at major airports uses trained bees in little capsules. There's little sensors looking at the bees' faces, and if they stick out their tongues, then that means they smell bombs. Story 101. Sharks are older than trees. They've been around for about 400 million years, while trees only appeared around 350 million years ago. Story 102. Bananas meet the botanical criteria for a berry. They come from a flower with only one ovary and have multiple seeds inside. Strawberries, on the other hand, are aggregate fruits because they develop from a flower with multiple ovaries. Story 103. There is one lake that contains nearly 25 of all the world's surface fresh water, Lake Baikal. Wild stuff. Story 104. You have more great-great-great-grandparents 37 generations back in time than the number of people who have ever lived, 137.5 billion. Story 105. It is impossible to accurately measure how long a coastline is, because the smaller the unit of measurement used, the longer it will measure out to be. So if you measure it in miles, it will be shorter than if you measure it in feet, then convert that number to miles. It's because of fractal geometry and is called the coastline paradox. Story 106. Government spending creates currency, tax deletes it. It's the opposite of the mainstream narrative, and yet it's 100 mathematically true and easy to figure out logically if you think about it for 5 minutes. Story 107. Even when the movie Never Been Kissed came out, there were people pretending to be teenagers still and attending high school. Story 108. The atoms that make up all the human race can fit into a single sugar cube. That's a crazy perspective to look at. Story 109. High heels was originally invented for riding horses. Clips in like how bike pedals and skis might work, so the riders can use their hands more freely during combat. It is a very manly thing before the Industrial Revolution. Story 110. There was a battle in W2 that had the Wehrmacht, French POWs, the U.S. Army, and the Austrian resistance fighting together defending a castle besieged by the Waffen-SS, Castle Eater. Story 111. There are neutron stars that spin so fast that they can be measured in milliseconds and are called millisecond pulsars. The fastest of them have equatorial velocities more comparable to a significant portion the speed of light, 14^25, the speed of light. They're always born in binary systems, and in some cases, they completely destroy their companion stars by what I can only call a cosmic blowtorch. Story 112. When baby horses are in the womb, their hooves are soft and have tentacles on them to prevent them harming the mother. They look really weird but drop off in 30 minutes. Story 113. In Madagascar, there lives a species of moth that feeds ETA almost exclusively on the tears of sleeping birds. Story 114. Mantis shrimp strike their prey so quickly, with speed up to 50 onMF and acceleration up to 10^400G, that it generates cavitation bubbles between their claw and the surface of the prey. The prey is hit twice, first by the claw at a force of 1,500 newtons, and second by the collapse of the cavitation bubbles, which produces a shock wave strong enough to stun or eliminate much larger prey than the shrimp itself. They can crack aquarium glass and split open a human thumb. Edit, accuracy. Answer. I did a little more reading, and here are some other fun facts. Some species of mantis shrimp are rainbow-colored and mind-bogglingly beautiful. Humans have 3 types of color-receptive cone cells in our eyes that allow us to see all the colors we do. Mantis shrimps have 16 types of color-receptive cone cells and are able to see both UV and polarized light. The force of the collapsing cavitation bubbles produces temperatures of several thousand kelvins and also emits tiny bursts of light called sonoluminescence. Finally, here is a video of an unfortunate dude getting punched in the foot by a pissed-off mantis shrimp. Story 115. The CEO. Woolly mammoths didn't completely die out until about 1,000 years after the Great Pyramids of Giza were constructed, and French explorers on expedition to the North Pole in 1872 found so many well-preserved mammoth specimens that they were able to survive by cooking and eating their meat. Story 116. When you get a kidney transplant, they usually just leave your original kidneys in your body and put the third kidney in your pelvis. Story 117. Charlie Chaplin outlived Elvis Presley. It's amazing how many people think Chaplin died in the black and white film era. Answer. On a similar note, what do Anne Frank, MLK Jr., and Barbara Walters have in common? They were born the same year. Things many view as history were lived experiences by people alive today. The first African-American children to go to desegregated schools in the South are the same age or younger than most Redditors' grandparents. Many of our parents are the same age. Story 118. France last used the guillotine in 1977. I assume they stopped using it after the French Revolution. C'est ma faute. Answer. The guillotine is actually one of the most humane methods of execution. We use the methods we do in the modern day because they look better to the viewers. Lethal injection can cause extreme pain even when done correctly. Gas is also extremely painful, and the electric chair is just hell on earth. The most humane way to execute someone is from close range with a large caliber handgun or shotgun to the lower back of the skull. Passing is much quicker. Story 119. The first part of our bodies that form are the jerk and the mouth, and then everything else grows in between them. We are a type of organism called a deuterostome, meaning two openings. Story 120. People used to eat ground-up mummies and put it into other products too. This created a market for it, which led to fake mummies. Much more recently, dead people dried out, being used in a similar fashion. Story 121. A class of fungus known as mycorrhizae can infect the roots of plants, leaching away the sugars created by the plants, but in return giving them access to more nutrients, as the fungus can spread much further than the roots of the plant. The fungus can actually connect two plants together, allowing them to share nutrients and communicate with each other, warning of invading insects or pathogens, so the other plants can prepare defenses, for example, in an underground network of sorts. Story 122. Those pictures of Chinese water deer with huge vampire fangs I thought were a hoax for years, like the drop bear. When I saw one, I was like, what the hell, that's a real thing. Story 123. I once won a game of Trivial Pursuit because I knew this. General Feldmarschall Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher believed himself to be pregnant with an elephant fathered by a French infantryman. Answer. It appears that this interpretation is based on misunderstanding of Blücher's German. I recall reading, and can try to trace the source if wanted, that being pregnant with an elephant by an X was a way of saying in Berlin vernacular that this X was giving a person headache. AW, what Blücher meant was something like, those darn French are causing me trouble. Miko H19, 2216, October 2006, UTC. Story 124. There was a Charo army created here in Mexico to defend the country if the Nazis arrived. Imagine a similar outfit as the one the mariachis have. That's a Charo. 100 men and horses using guns and machetes. Of course, it sounds ridiculous to think that such army could make any harm to Hitler's forces, but the fear at that time was such that they would have done anything to defend the country. Answer. Have you heard about the Home Guard in Britain? Wore army uniform, but at least initially armed with agricultural implements, and basically consisted of older men and those who were unfit to be soldiers or in reserved occupations. There is a very popular comedy series about them, but they are quite revered. We are going to have a Home Guard parade in our village this year. I know we were closer to being invaded, but given the U.S. involvement in the war, I get why Mexico also developed its version. Story 125. I learned in biology class that if you have a gene turned one way, licorice tastes sweet, and if it's turned the other way, it tastes bitter. Story 126. The first humans didn't arrive in Madagascar from the African mainland, but from the Malay archipelago across the Indian Ocean. To this day, Madagascans speak Malagasy, an Austronesian language. Story 127. That terror was real and not some bizarre folktale. At the start of the War of the First Coalition, Terrari joined the French Revolutionary Army, where even quadruple the standard military ration was unable to satisfy his large appetite. He would eat any available food from gutters and refuse heaps, but his condition still deteriorated through hunger. He was hospitalized due to exhaustion and became the subject of a series of medical experiments to test his eating capacity, in which, among other things, he ate a meal intended for 15 people in a single sitting, ate live cats, snakes, lizards, and puppies, and swallowed eels whole without chewing. Despite his unusual diet, he was underweight, and with the exception of his eating habits, he showed no signs of mental illness other than what was described as an apathetic temperament. Story 128. Probably buried, but there is a 100-acre forest in Utah that's just one giant tree. Short version, it's a single colony of tree that has a massive root system that's estimated to be thousands of years old. Story 129. Horses evolved in North America, spread to Asia, then went extinct in North America, and were reintroduced by European settlers. Story 130. The Isle of Scilly, pronounced Scilly, in Netherlands are not sure if they have been at war for 300 years, so they signed a peace treaty recently just to make sure. Story 131. Suri, we have lost the original videotape of Apollo 11. What we see is a camera recording a TV because the process for sending image from the moon to the Earth was not compatible with TV channels. And after the mission, they forgot to check the videotape, so someone probably deleted accidentally what was on it to put a TV show or something. Story 132. The Pacific Ocean is so large that the Wasiir is a point where you could tunnel straight through the Earth, and when you come out the other end, you are still in the Pacific Ocean. Also, there is at all times a pair of points on opposite sides of the Earth, where both the temperature and air pressure are the same, and this is true for any two continuous variables. Story 133. A Canadian soldier, Low Major, single-handedly liberated the Dutch town of Zwolle from the Nazis during WW2. It's not even a small town. Story 134. Trees communicate with each other via pheromones, ascent signals, as well as other methods. They use this to warn each other about drought, disease, and to share memes. Story 135. Australia had a prime minister that went swimming in the ocean and then just disappeared. We still don't know what actually happened to him. Also, we lost a war against emus. And there's an unconfirmed rumor, I think, that our current prime minister took a poo in a McDonald's. It did. I should have been a bit clear about this. He did a poo in his pants while he was still wearing them. We have a weird history. Story 136. Funamarn. Bamboo is a grass. Echidna has four-headed male body part. Peanuts are legumes. Beans. Some carnivorous plants are sticky enough to trap birds. Not the monkey cups in jungles. I'm talking about mats of sticky leaves strong enough to keep birds from flying away. Some people do not react with poison ivy, poison oak, or poison sumac giant. Kelp can grow up to 2 feet a day under the right conditions. Giant redwood and sequoia trees. Branches get thicker as you go up, allowing for unique ecosystems to develop at their canopies. Pineapple is a kind of bromeliad. Strangler figs literally choke other trees by squeezing their trunks until they die. Some plants have no chlorophyll and get nutrients by parasitizing other plants. There is no agreed-upon botanical definition of tree edits. Fixed the tree thing and cleared up the oak sumac. Thank you to those that brought those to my attention. Story 137. Atropa belladonna, aka deadly nightshade and beautiful lady, was previously used by women in Venice during ancient times to make their pupil size dilated in order to look more attractive for the men. It's now used as medicinal purposes to cause dilaton of the pupils by blocking a specific nerve receptor, and it's also classified as a poison. Story 138. To test the safety of an airplane ejector seat today, you'd use a sophisticated crash test dummy with lots of sensors. In 1960, however, the U.S. Air Force used a drugged black bear that weighed the same as a human pilot. This and vending machines have eliminate more people than sharks. Story 139. A sandwich is named after the Earl of Sandwich, who wanted some non-sticky food he could eat while playing cards. Story 140. Your brain predicts what you're about to experience before you actually experience it by an infinitesimal amount of time. Our vision, in fact, runs 100 milliseconds behind the real world. So our evolution has adapted our brain to predict what is about to happen before we actually see it happen. And it is usually right, but not always. Hence, our entire reality that we experience is actually a story that our brain creates of the real world, and not, in fact, an experience of the real world. Weird neuroscience stuff. Answer: I notice this with age, particularly with reading. My brain predicts words based on past experience, and sometimes provides similar words that almost, but not quite make sense. I think it is also true in accidents involving older people. We get so used to our environment being a certain way that we don't quite see the difference between our brain's prediction and what is actually happening. Story 141. If you take a tray and uproot it, then take all the leaves off of the tree limbs and plant the limbs down in the ground, the original roots will grow leaves and the old limbs will become the roots. Story 142. I have two. 1. Cleopatra 7. The Cleopatra was born closer to the invention of the iPhone than to the construction of the Great Pyramids. 2. Mansa Musa of Mali was the wealthiest man in human history. He was so rich when he went on a pilgrimage to Mecca, he spent so much gold on the way there, he actually caused rapid hyperinflation of basic goods because he devalued gold so severely, he actually had to buy the gold back at an increased rate in order to stabilize the entire regional economy. Story 143. Scientists suggest that the ring of Saturn is 101 million years old and shark species as a whole is 400 million years old. That means the species of sharks is older than the ring of Saturn. Story 144. In 1970, scientists confirmed Chernobyl was safe. Chernobyl in this case means wormwood. It was believed that wormwood drove people mad. The city of Chernobyl is named after the surrounding wormwood forests. Story 145. That the manufacturer of McDonald's McFlurry machines, Taylor, has been running a repair racket for years, bugging their machines with malicious code, keeping franchises in constant need of their monopoly on repairs. A small firm called Kitsch developed a device that can diagnose and debug the machines. The two companies are now in court after Kitsch filed a restraining order following numerous attempts to purchase machines directly through lawyers, franchisees, and using aliases. Story 146. Cow farts are one of the easiest ways an alien species could detect life on Earth from across the galaxy. Story 147. They use reflective paint on reindeer antlers in Finland to prevent drivers from hitting them in the long, dark, icy winters. Story 148. The golden age of piracy began in the aftermath of the War of the Spanish Succession, which was caused by the Spanish Habsburg dynasty going extinct due to inbreeding. So in other words, we have the cousin fudge Habsburgs to thank for Pirates of the Caribbean. Story 149. For a time, the number of people who drowned by falling in a pool correlated with films that featured Nicolas Cage. Story 150. Penguins shoot with the fastest force out of all the animals in the planet because if they shat any slower, they would lose internal body heat. Story 151. There was once a guy in China who got a male body part transplant. It had to be removed soon after the procedure because it drove the man and his wife insane. Story 152. Amazon started off as an online bookstore. The crime rate in the Netherlands is so low, they have to ship in inmates so the guards don't lose their jobs. It takes 30 cows to supply enough leather to supply the NFL for 1 year. Antarctica holds the 90 of the world's freshest water. I got dozens of these. Story 153. Even though the body of a caterpillar is almost completely dissolved during metamorphosis, the insect still recognizes toxic plants as a butterfly. Story 154. America is named after a man who sold pickles. His name was Amerigo Vespucci, nicknamed the Pickle Merchant. Story 155. The guy who sang Peanut Butter Jelly Time died in a police shootout while his brother-in-law Snoop Dogg tried to talk him down over the phone. Answer: close, but not quite. He shot a cop and ran, then took 2 hostages, who managed to escape unharmed later during the event. The cops played a recording of Snoop trying to convince him to turn himself in. Not Snoop directly, but he wouldn't. When they finally breached the apartment he had barricaded himself in, police found him dead with a gunshot to the head, presumably self-inflicted, as the police denied firing any shots at all during the standoff. Story 156. When doctors do surgery and have to get past your intestines, they just move them aside and shove them back in randomly when they're done. Your body reorganizes them on its own. Story 157. Operation Northwoods. The U.S. devised a plan where they would attack and eliminate their own citizens and blame it on Cuba in order to garner support from the U.S. people for an invasion of Cuba. Kennedy vetoed the idea. Story 158. Jalapenos were not originally spicy, but they became spicy as a defense mechanism against humans, but all that did was make it worse for them. Story 159. There are more bacterial cells than human cells in your body. There are more water molecules in a glass of water than there are glasses of water in all the oceans. The density of the gas you breathe in affects the pitch of your voice. Low-density gases, e.g., helium, make your voice high-pitched, but high-density gases make your voice lower-pitched. This is due to the way the sound waves travel through gases of different densities. Story 160. Maned wolves are not wolves. Mountain goats are not goats. Electric eels are not eels. King cobras are not cobras. Horned toads are not toads. Peacock mantis shrimp are not peacocks, not mantises, and not shrimp. Story 161. Michael Jordan was the general manager of the Wizards. Drafted a player, couldn't stand him complaining, so he became a player for the Wizards to play with him. Story 162. After being suspected of eating a toddler, he was ejected from the hospital. Next time I'm having a bad day, I will look back on this and just be thankful that I've never been so hungry that I had to resort to eating corpses and children. Story 163. We have real invisibility cloaks now that work both on the human eye and electronic equipment, called wave-bending metamaterials. They bend light right around objects as if they weren't there. Story 164. That banana flavoring tastes different to bananas because it was based on a banana that went practically extinct. Sounds made up, totally true. Story 165. Ukraino-Polish means borderlands, but Ukrainian means homeland. And yes, these two words also mean Ukraine. Story 166. Sloths can starve to passing on a full stomach. It has to do with the enzymes microbes in their stomach that doesn't allow them to digest properly. So they basically have food just sitting there in their belly. Story 167. The grandson of former President John Tyler, born 1790, is still alive. Here's a picture comparing John Tyler and his grandson, Harrison Ruffin Tyler. Story 168. Flatworms are born hermaphrodites. When they're ready to mate, both worms perform male body part fencing. Yes, it's exactly what you think it is. They sword fight with their male body part until one of them is stabbed. And inseminated, the loser becomes a female and becomes pregnant with the winning worm's babies. God has a sense of humor. Story 169. Theoretically, if an alien living on a planet 200 million light years away had a device by which they could view Earth due to the 200 light years gap in light reach, instead of seeing humans through the device, aliens would instead see dinosaurs from the Jurassic period, since that's the era from which the light has reached till that point. Story 170. Lemons are not naturally occurring. Humans created them as a hybrid of bitter orange and citron. Cleopatra lived closer to the release of the iPhone than she did to the creation of the pyramids of Giza. Pyramids built 2600 BC. Cleopatra alive from 69 BC to 30 BC. iPhone released in 2007. Mosquitoes are responsible for half of all human deaths. About 108 billion humans have existed. Mosquitoes are thought to have eliminated about 54 billion. Story 171. If your wife cheats on you, gets pregnant, and gives birth while married in Germany, the law forces you to be on the birth certificate and to pay for that other guy's child until it is an adult and finished its first education, job training, or college. Even if you have 100, prove it is not your child. Story 172. A friend of mine recently had an ectopic pregnancy which ruptured. She is fine now, and as a result, they had to remove her fallopian tube. She was annoyed about this because she thought it meant she only had one functioning ovary, but she was told that this is not the case. Fallopian tubes can actually move around and provide access to the uterus to either ovary. They have a favorite, but some people with only one fallopian tube do get pregnant via an ovum released from the wrong ovary. Story 173. I get downvoted every time I answer this, but there are more trees on Earth than stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Story 174. The only way to ensure a person can be an organ donor is to keep them alive, i.e., continue CPR, etc., after they're dead, i.e., brain dead or equivalent. Story 175. Way too late, but I need to say this. Every time you shuffle a deck of cards, that particular arrangement is brand new, and it is the first time the cards have ever been sorted in that order in human history. Story 176. When you get a liver transplant or transplants like that, your body sees it as foreign and so attacks it. The doctors counteract this by weakening your immune system so that it doesn't eliminate the new organ. Story 177. The drive from San Diego, CA to El Paso, TX is not as far as the drive from El Paso, TX to Houston, TX. Story 178. There's a family of birds where males spends their entire lives practicing insanely intricate courting dances, just ridiculously complicated, Swan Lake level complicated. They're called birds of paradise, and they've faced pretty much no predation or outside environmental pressures for the majority of their existence. Basically, their every need has been taken care of, so the females have been the ones to instill the evolutionary pressure. They still wanted to be selective in choosing their mate in order to raise the best possible offspring, and the males still wanted to show they were worthy, so they kind of made up their own standards that somehow ended up building up into just a huge, complicated mess. One of my favorites is a bird that has a chosen dance floor on the forest floor that it cleans every day. It moves all the leaves and sticks and shoot that fell the night before until it's just bare dirt, and it practices its moves all day every day until a female comes along. Then it proceeds through a courting dance with 4 distinct parts in a very exact order, each part having a complex series of movements. These dances can last anywhere from 20 minutes to hours on end, and the majority of the time the female doesn't even stay for the whole thing. When they do succeed, it's a 10-second tops insemination, and the female's on her way. And then the male just goes back to practicing for the next female. Just insane. Story 179. Mark Zuckerberg contains 0 robotic cyborg parts, although I bet someone makes whirring noises whenever he turns his head in a meeting. Story 180. There was a war against emus in my country, and we lost the war. We lost the war against giant birds. Just sad. Story 181. The single deadliest man in history wasn't Stalin or Hitler or some dictator, but a mild-mannered chemist with over 100 patents named Dr. Thomas Midgley. He invented a new method for mass-producing leaded no-knock gasoline, leading to widespread adoption, and later invented CFC refrigerants. Ironically, he was poisoned by lead due to working around it so much, leading to him later becoming an invalid. He built an elaborate series of pulleys to get out of bed, which led to his passing when he became tangled in them and strangled to passing. Was by all accounts a stand-up guy, but was responsible to 2 of the worst chemical disasters in human history, causing the premature deaths of literally hundreds of millions, and died by his own hand. Story 182. There are a lot of moths, 200-300 described species, that don't have a digestive system. They have all the fats they get before their change. They breed, then starve to passing. Since the mouth parts of adult saturnids or vestigial and digestive tracts are absent, adults subsist on stored lipids acquired during the larval stage. Story 183. Time moves slower when you are next to the bases of the Great Pyramids at Giza. It happens whether you are close to the base or not, but evidently it's noticeable to the naked eye. Story 184. That a weird rich guy who had a private FK island staffed with underage girls for some reason had a painting of a president in a dress in the entrance to his home. Story 185. Honey badger's skin is tough enough to resist several machete blows and is almost impervious to arrows and spears. Story 186. The notion recommendation that you don't drink while on antibiotics is nonsense for almost all antibiotics. Granted, there are half a dozen or so where adult beverage will affect you while on that antibiotics, but the rest, it's just an old saying and is completely untrue. The actual reason for not drinking while on antibiotics was because they were used to treat syphilis, an STD. So, those that had syphilis were told not to drink during the treatment period, not because it would affect them in any way if they did, but because they'd get tipsy and go off and have intimacy and spread the syphilis. Story 187. A pizza guy in Detroit invented modern bulletproof vests because he was tired of getting shot at and robbed while on deliveries. Story 188. You ever notice that things that banana flavor don't quite taste like what you think bananas taste like? That's because the flavoring is based off of the Gros Michel banana that actually went extinct in 1965. The bananas we are accustomed to now are Cavendish bananas, which taste different. Story 189. In 1,518 people literally danced themselves to passing during an epidemic known as the dancing plague. Story 190. There's a pretty good chance that you know or have known at least one person who committed takedown. Story 191. There is a phenomenon that allows for an object to be locked in position in midair, pinned in space. See quantum locking, flux pinning, and the Meissner effect. Story 192. India, Brazil, China. You had approximately 12 chance of being born in these 3 places, another 12 chance to be born in one of the 192 other countries. Story 193. The present does not exist. The time you read this and processes it in your brain, it is already in the past. Story 194. Can't escape? The best way to fend of a black bear is to try beating the ever-living shoot out of it. Story 195. Sperm whales are one of the loudest animals on Earth, which has a 230 decibels. And airplanes are 150 decibels from takeoff, and doctors used to do surgery on infants without anesthesia, but was stopped in late 90s. Story 196. Tomorrow Island and Yesterday Island are separated by 2 miles, 8 kilometers, but separated by 21 hours. Story 197. The ancient pyramids were as ancient to the ancient Egyptians as the ancient Egyptians are to us. Just let that sink in. Story 198. You can see something on the internet that you disagree with or that offends you without having to let people know you disagree with it or that it offends you. Story 199. One of the main reasons we didn't eradicate polio worldwide 20 years ago was because of U.S. intelligence agencies posing as vaccination teams and getting caught. This destroyed trust both on a local and governmental level to the point that polio, among other diseases, have made a resurgence. Story 200. Guns don't make any sound. The gunpowder exploding is what you can hear. The gun itself only makes an almost inaudible sound of the firing pin clicking into place. Story 201. YouTube started as a dating site, but since so many people used it to share videos of their pets, they just went with it and made it into what it is today. Story 202. Ben Franklin was never president. The U.S. cavalry baited and poisoned almost the entire Shasta tribe. All the planets in the solar system can fit between Earth and the Moon. Story 203. Reddit's political and world views do not represent the vast majority of the world population's views. The world is far more nuanced than Reddit. Story 204. Doesn't sound fake, but vaccines save lives. That's all I can say. We literally eradicated polio because of vaccines. Rabies is no longer a threat now, as it has a very high mortality rate. Get vaccinated ASAP. Story 205. If Dr. Martin Luther King and Anne Frank were alive today, they'd both be the same age as Barbara Walters. Story 206. The full anatomy of the clitoris was only discovered in 2005. In case you're reading this and asking WTF, there is to discover a clitoris is like an iceberg. About 90 of it is hidden below the surface, internal. Story 207. There was a short period of time at the end of the 80s where Pepsi had the 6th largest navy in the world. Pepsi Navy. Story 208. The average person eats X spiders in their sleep. Factoid not only isn't true, it originated in a book as an example of a bullshit lie that people would believe without fact-checking. Story 209. There are only 25 blimps in the entire world. Of those, only about half are actually in operation right now, and they are almost exclusively within the United States. There are currently more astronauts than there are blimp pilots. Story 210. Charlie Chaplin lost a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest. So did Dolly Parton, who lost a Dolly Parton look-alike contest, I think. Story 211. My father grew up down the street from Janis Joplin, and they were close friends. In high school, he was on the football team, and their captain was bullying Joplin. He ended up trying to bring the peace between them, and the three ended up becoming close friends. That team captain was Jimmy Johnson. They graduated together, and Joplin met an early passing. But my dad was friends with Johnson until my dad's passing in 2012. Story 212. Canada maintains a strategic reserve of maple syrup for significant financial reasons, which can lead to some fun capers. Story 213. There's a mammal that is venomous, also doesn't give birth, also it lays eggs and had a duckbill. Story 214. Samurai were officially abolished in Japan in 1867. The first ever fax machine was invented in 1843. Abraham Lincoln died in 1865. So, there was a 22-year window where the samurai technically could send a fax to Alan. Also that when doctors finish surgery, they put the organs back in your body, and your organs just automatically know where to go from like a muscle memory type of thing, and wriggle back to the correct spot. Story 215. Sea unicorns are a real thing. There are actually animals that look like seals with 10-foot-long tusks. I was 37 years old when I found out narwhals are actually real. Story 216. Ice for gin and tonics for the British colonial rulers of India was shipped by rail and then sailboat after being harvested from the frozen lakes of Minnesota. Story 217. Male honeybees, drones, have grandfathers, but they do not have fathers. Crazy, but 100 true. I can elaborate if you want. LOL. Story 218. Hobbits, or Homo floresiensis, existed until around 0 years ago. They were native to Indonesia and stood around forfed Michael Jackson was a JW, and voluntarily, practically the equivalent of defellowshipping, left after Thriller pissed off the Watchtower. Story 219. Disney made a Star Wars film where Luke Skywalker is a grumpy, tragic end hermit who gives up on his friends in the Jedi, tosses away his lightsaber, drinks tit milk, gets his jerk kicked by a novice, then pranks his nephew before dying of tiredness. Story 220. If you can fit all the planets of the solar system, side by side they would fit between the Earth and the Moon. Story 221. Kurt Cobain was only a year younger than Rick Astley. The first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, came out only 2 years after the Vietnam War ended. There were people born in the 19th century that were still alive in 2017, 2018. Story 222. When I was 13, I started an anti-pineapple cult on Vercat, and the cult is still a thing to this day somehow. Story 223. The largest air force in the world is the U.S. Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the U.S. Navy. Story 224. World War I was started because a man went to console himself with his favorite sandwich after failing to eliminate Franz Ferdinand. And Franz Ferdinand's car broke down immediately outside the sandwich shop as the failed assassin was leaving with his sandwich, still armed. Story 225. About 30 of the mass of soil, that's good healthy soil, is fungus. Dead and alive fungus. I don't know about you, but I find that kinda awesome. Story 226. Koalas have fingerprints that so closely resemble a human's that koala fingerprints have been mistaken for partial human fingerprints at crime scenes. Also, in some parts of Australia, about 90 of the koalas have chlamydia. Story 227. That Donald Trump won presidency and his only candidate was Hillary Clinton. Not political. It's just bizarre. Those were our options in a country of brilliant people who would have been amazing candidates. Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. If you'd like to see more content like this, you might be interested to know that I've created another channel with a similar theme, especially for those of you who enjoy what I do. I'll leave a link in the description, and I hope to see you there. Take care.